Well, what up, everybody? Welcome to our post-sermon conversation, and today we are going to be talking about the weight of humility. That this last Sunday we started a conversation in the season of Lent, really around this idea of reclaiming our story, and we focused in on both. It was kind of an introduction to the big picture of what we feel like God is saying to us as a church, and then this kind of first image, which I actually believe is not just only a first image for us, but in many ways is the first image of the scriptures, which is there's something about this way of humility. I find that the Bible, when it talks about a lot of these virtues we carry and this identity we carry, it starts here. And not always, but there's something about it in so many different passages where humility becomes that starting point. And so for us, it was that starting point. And our heart is very simple. We want to talk through this so that we can grow deeper, so that we can go further, so that we can be faithful to what Jesus has called us to do. And of course, joined by Rahsaan and Mitch, and can't wait to have these conversations with you guys. So here's what I want to start. And Rahsaan, I want to start with you. So when you kind of sat with the sermon and with the texts and just with all of this yourself over the last couple of days, for you, what stood out as significant for you when you're like, this is the thing that we need to be leaning into? What was that for you?
Yeah. Shout out to young adults. I think I was thinking and like seeing through the lens of the young adult community, right? And it was part of your intro. It might not even been like, it might have just been like, yo, let's like, this is how I'm leading into this. But you talked about so a website or a magazine, whatever, that survey pastors and talking about the post-COVID church, right? Like just to say that alone is super interesting to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, yo, this will go down in history and on all different levels, but the post-COVID church and how we have to rethink or one of the things that you said, how we have to own our faith more, how we have to, it's a separation between the church and culture. God has done something. Yeah. You know what I mean? Paraphrasing what you said, that he's making sure that like we have to be authentic and true and who we are as Christians, and we're not going to look like the world anymore. Christianity will not be covered with this, with clothing of the world and then saying I'm Christian. Like there's this big separation, there's this big gap. So like just navigating that and thinking about that, thinking about how we're evangelists, thinking about how we broadcast our faith, how we build a kingdom when, you know, running up in the grocery store, you know, at a mall or wherever we would normally kind of like, oh, God is pricking me, I got to go speak to this person. It looks different when you have a face mask on. It looks different when you're supposed to social distance. Like, how do we, now that there is a gap, now that, you know, church isn't the most popular thing anymore, and there's some radical kind of rebellion going on with different movements and different faiths, how do we now say and step up and be like, yo, this is how I own my faith. This is how I'm separated from culture, and I want to get it in for the gospel.
Yeah, and I think it's so important because, you know, I think everybody, and I don't think anybody even needs me to explain this. Like, there's a shaking happening, right? And we all feel it.
Yeah.
And there's two false, I think, reactions to that shaking. One is to kind of hide and just go, I can't wait for things to go back to the way they were. And the other is to let the shaking detach you from Jesus and from his community, right? And but for a lot of us, that's kind of our option A and option B. Am I going to just react, hold on, bunker down, and I just can't wait for everything to get back to normal? Or am I like, man, this is exposing, and I'm out on this, or whatever the case may be? But actually recognizing that in the shaking, Jesus is trying to meet us, and Jesus is doing a work, and it's not just a work like oh man, COVID was hard and Jesus is faithful. He's actually using this moment to reclaim his church. And that's what the mindset we have to have. And I love that, Rahsaan, because it is that thing of going, there is a lot, right, that we actually do need to hold on to in the midst of this season. But if our hearts are open, there's a lot that was desperately needed to change. And it needed to change way before COVID. But COVID has exposed that. And even in what I was talking about, in that sense of, I believe God is doing lots of things in his church right now. But there's this thing I can't shake, that he is trying to give his church authority. And what's happened is this authority he's already given us, it's the promise of the scriptures, has gotten covered and clouded and grown over by all of these other realities that got to be stripped off. And that's what COVID is doing. It's stripping them off. And if we'll let Jesus, he's going to strip them off in a way where when we come out of this radical authority to be his people, both in our lives, in our relationships, in our families, in our cities, and in the mission. And so to me, I really do believe, even I agree. I love that vision. What is the post-COVID church? And boy, the post-COVID church is going to be a lot of things, but it is, if we're listening to Jesus, the post-COVID church is going to be the most beautiful bride that we've ever known, the most pure bride we've ever known.
Yeah, it makes me think my grandpa lived to be 99 years old, and he, towards the end of his life, kind of was living in like a kind of assisted living kind of facility, right? Mm-hmm. And he's my hero, and he lived a life and like kept joy in his heart, because I don't think he lingered on what was. He always had a bigger vision of what God was doing rather than just what was. And it was really easy to kind of like juxtapose that disposition towards, the guy living across in the assisted living facility, who was bitter because he spent the second half of his life wishing things would go back to normal. And I think that's a normal phenomenon in everyone's life. Man, if I wait long enough, it will go back to the best days, rather than kind of walking with the Lord as he goes in front of you, ushering you into what's new. And we kind of rip on that. Like the best is yet to come. We like rip on that a little bit at our church. But I think that it's the idea of, if you're not in control of leading your life, you're actually submitted to Jesus. He's going before you and he's going to lead you through whatever you're going into. But if you're following someone and you're walking backwards, you're as likely to stumble, to fall, to get off path, right? And so I think part of the beautiful thing of starting a series on reclaiming our story is, the first and foremost, what we have to do is fix our eyes on Jesus, right? And then we have to humble ourselves and follow him. And what we can't do as the church moving forward is say that we're following Jesus with our eyes turned behind us, wishing and longing that things would go back to the way things were. I think it would rob us of joy, and the joy of the Lord is our strength. So we render ourselves powerless. Yeah. And so I love the idea that it's reclaiming our story. It's starting with repentance. It's starting with humility. It's starting with reminding ourselves that to be a Christian is to be a follower of the way of Jesus, which means he goes before, we abide in his shadow as he goes before, and then to also remind ourselves that in him leading, we're moving into something, and we're reimagining and restoring and redeeming what is out front, and not living a life of bitterness caused from looking what's behind and what we wish could be. And I also think as we're all young leaders, me being the youngest here, is like, it is the worst lifestyle to imagine glory days that didn't have problems. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, man, if I could go back 10 years, it'd be awesome. It's like 10 years ago had problems, That was problems, It all has their own problems. And if you interviewed a pastor in the middle of nowhere, like Arkansas, and was like, hey man, how's your life? It's hard. You know what? We all signed up. Yeah. How's being a Christian, man? It's 1994. What's going on? I don't know, man. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard to,
I love it. That makes me think of this moment with Emily. Well, there's two parts of this moment. One that's actually very true, but the other, right? Emily's told me this was several years ago. She's like, I miss how much you used to laugh, right? And what she's talking about is when we were first married in Southern California. And there's a whole other side of that. That's not the point of this conversation. But I remember looking back and go, yeah, Emily, I used to laugh a lot when I didn't have any flipping responsibility. I wasn't responsible for anything. I wasn't in charge of anything.
I had my hair.
My glorious, beautiful hair. Yeah. Shut up, Emily! It's just like, but there's that thing. It's like, but even in that sense of like, I can pine for days that were easier, but you know what? I had no responsibility in terms of, I was responsible for my life and my family and things, but like, I wasn't pastoring a community. Right. People weren't under my shepherding care. Yeah. God hadn't asked me to do certain things. I wasn't caring. And it's sometimes we go, it would be easier, but you want to know, I wasn't made for easy. Yeah. I was made for authority. And that's what I want.
And I think what's great is like, there is a remnant of people. A lot of words that start with R here. I just like, if you want to, this might just be a resource to be like, reclaim, repent, remnant, this is a good resource for anyone that's trying to put together a sermon for next week, But I think there's actually a group of people. What has happened is that there was an era of Sunday preparation that didn't take reimagination. Yeah, that rhymes.
No,
But there was, you know what I mean? Like there was an era where you could have packaged Sunday experiences that didn't actually, like you weren't just obliterated by news, by actual, by a pandemic, by everyone's opinion. You weren't being bombarded with that because it was something you didn't have to actually think about. And now what's happening, and the good news of this, is everybody's having to start thinking a little more critically about what life actually looks like, taking a little bit more ownership in their life of what are you going to do. And I think the beautiful thing is if we can reclaim being followers of Jesus, then our first and foremost response to that is, Jesus, what do you want me to do? And that's the lifestyle we always were supposed to have. But for so often, it was like, I already got my sermon series planned out for the next 15 years. Yeah. It's prepackaged. It's awesome. And whatever the new album that comes out, from Australia, we're just going to sing those songs. You know what I mean? Like, and that's no shade. But I'm saying, like, it's just exposing that some of those things had some weaknesses.
I think one of the things we look at when we talk about you have to figure out how to define our story in an authentic way, right? Because our stories was always defined by our intake of media, or there was this era, you talk about eras of church and world, the era of the church where the church was intentionally trying to be seeker friendly, where the church was intentionally trying to run like a business. Yeah. You know what I mean? The church got, to some extent, accepted it and said, hey, we have to be culturally relevant in order to be a sustainable church. Right. And I think that's where like there's tension now, right? With the information technology, Google and the blah, 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 YouTube and every other way that we can get information where we assimilate, where we adapt to culture. Now it's saying like, here's this separation, here's this tension, here's this call to be a more authentic Christian. You have to be now, right? All of the influences, all of the thoughts and ideas and all of the concepts that's out there, you have to now say, okay, wait a minute, I have to be this follower of Jesus the way that Mitch kind of points out. I have to be follower of the way and follow it authentically, which means I have to shut out a lot more. So shutting in during COVID, especially one of the things like when I was doing Zoom church with my young people, it's like, hey, take this opportunity. Like, it's not gonna, like if you're not anticipating things never being like it was, like, dude, you are gonna be upset. You're gonna be like that old dude, like, I wish, because it's never gonna be back pre-COVID. Like, it's gonna be post-COVID forever. We're always gonna have something that like we remember, something that we had to change permanently. And our faith, our walk, and the way that we conduct ourselves as believers is going to experience that this will never go back to normal.
Yeah. And I love what you guys are saying, because it comes back to this place of why everything about who we are has to be anchored into the person.
It has to be.
And I even think, I don't know, I don't even remember the name of the movie, maybe Twister or something. You guys remember back in the 90s, those movies about tornadoes? Mm-hmm. It was one of those ones, right? And there's a very last scene, I think this is highly unrealistic, but the picture stands out, right? Is that he's chasing this tornado and gets caught in it and trying to rescue this person. The tornado comes, and in this last minute, they actually find this iron pole, significant iron pole that goes deep into the ground, and they latch themselves onto this, and they literally, the eye of the tornado goes right through them. And again, as unrealistic as it might be, the picture stands, right? Sure. That they survived the storm because they were anchored into something larger than themselves, stronger than themselves. And this is what we have to realize about what this season is and the season that's coming. The season that's now is that Jesus was right on the Sermon on the Mount. If your life is not built on his foundation, the storm's coming and it will destroy your house. If you are anchored in Jesus, the storm's still going to come, but you're going to stand. Yeah. And there's that picture of how we have to be so anchored into the person of Jesus to, one, survive the storms. But this is the vision, right? Is that the post-COVID church will not be anchored into Jesus only when they need to. They will be anchored into Jesus in all times because they realize that's what they always need to. And there will be a totally different vision of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good. I also just think, like, it's a real time, because the sermon on humility, right? Like, humility is first and foremost the thing that should get the highest honor. I think we need to stop giving credit for things that aren't humble. Pastor Ben in Washington, who is just like a significant leader in my life, in our life, in the church's life. You know, like, Mitch, I don't care about anything other than humility, right? You know, as a significant leader in our denomination, as a significant pastor, an author, and just, you know, he's like, I don't care how skilled you are, how talented you are. If you're not humble, I just really don't have much space for me to give you honor. And it's always, you know, I was on some drive with him and he said it to me, like, just off the cuff, you know, like, and I was like, you know, and I'm like, you don't care? He's like, literally, I don't care about what you just produced. Like, if it was good, I'll say it's good, but what I care about, what draws my heart, what I'm willing to connect to is humility. Yeah. And I think there's something in that where I don't think that's the spectrum that, you know, has always been what we give honor to. And I think that, you know, reclaiming a position of humility, of lowliness, of knowing that, of not self-reliance, of depending on the Lord is really essential. I had somewhere else I was going with that. I like completely lost it.
Mitch, let me ask you even in the midst of that, right? Because actually this is why these two conversations were connected for me on Sunday, is because I think the pathway into that reclaiming is first and foremost humility. Yeah. And so, Mitch, even for you, as you're thinking about that and this kind of picture of the way of humility, and even that invitation of Luke 14, what for you in that of that invitation in humility, like, stands out? What does it look like, that connection between humility and honor, that connection of this way of humility that Jesus is inviting us into?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. I remembered where I was going with it.
Yeah.
First, so I was listening to another pastor, and he said, "This not allowed." No, I won't mention any names. Yeah. It was Matt Chandler, and I was listening to Pastor Matt, and he had this little clip that was like, "Do you think that because it's new to the United States that this is new to Christianity?" You know, right? Like, just basically blasting his church in Texas, right? Do you think this is new? And it's going to require us to humble ourselves, to actually look outwards, to being shaken, having storms in your life. Like, do you know that there are people that are persecuted? Like, do you know that there are people being martyred? Do you know that there's people suffering that if they're not anchored into something stronger and deeper to them, they will be crushed? And I think that for so often we've assumed that we're on the forefront. And I think we need to actually humble ourselves and look and listen and hear and see how churches all around the world have actually endured what's going on. And they've done it without making themselves known. You know what I mean? You know what you don't see is the small house church in China that's experiencing revival, blasting themselves on Instagram, being like, hey, follow me. Actually, I've got a program that you can buy for $125 a month to do this thing. And that's, you know, once again, that's not to be like, just to be, you know, angsty, but I think there's something in that of like, resilience is resilience. And when your validation comes in the Lord, you don't actually have to prove that you're resilient.
No, that's incredible, because even in this, like, I was talking with another pastor friend, and I said this statement, and I believe it in the context is, I said, there's never been a harder time to be a pastor, and there's not a more important time to be a pastor. And of course, what I mean by that is there's never been a harder time to be a pastor in my context in this moment.
Sure.
Because the truth is, how sad is that this is the hardest time in our lives of being pastors and Christians. When you think about what the church globally and historically has gone through, this is part of it. Part of what's happening is God's going, yeah, you know what? I love sweet toddler 2-year-old America church, but I'm pretty ready for a more mature church.
Yeah.
And sometimes you've got to walk through stuff. You've got to learn, like this should not be the hardest thing we've ever gone through. And may it give us profound grace and honor for churches globally and churches historically that have walked through such devastating realities. And that's not minimized. This season has been hard.
Yeah.
That's not a minimization on this season at all. But it is a statement of going, yes, you want to know what the church, historic and global, has figured out? They stay faithful when it's suffering, when it's hard, when it's inconvenient. And there's this thing, I love this. I have a friend who's a father and a mentor in my life. He's coming to speak, and I was on the phone with him today, and I was talking about it, and I was like, you know, I kind of said to him, I go, I would really love you to, originally I wanted you to come later in the year when maybe our church is a little bit further along and kind of things are a little bit back to normal. And I just admitted, even in my own insecurity, like, I don't want to have you come in and then there's just only a few of us. And he looked at me, he goes, stop. He goes, you never have to talk about that with me. He goes, my favorite church in the world. He's somebody who lives and has pastored and ministered all around the world. He goes, my favorite church in the world is a church of 12 people in the West Bank. They're my heroes. And by the way, in the West Bank, that's a mega church. And he goes, so if I get to come and I get to speak to 2 people, he goes, I don't care at all, because this is what he said. He goes, I want to give my life away to anyone who would consider giving their life away to Jesus. And whether it's a mega church in the United States or it's 12 people in the West Bank, I'm going to go where there's faithfulness. And it was just this reminder, right? Like, oh, this season's so hard. And right now, there's a church of 12 in the West Bank, Palestinian Christians, that are facing things so much harder than us.
Yeah.
And again, not to minimize, but actually to strengthen into.
Stir up.
That's my family.
Yeah.
Man, that's my family. Palestinian Christians on the brunt of both sides, unliked by the Jewish community, unliked by the Arab community, and the true outsiders in this heartbreaking reality that's a whole nother conversation, but yet day after day, holding faithful to Jesus, suffering in his name, evangelizing in his name. It's like, yes, God.
Yeah.
Yes, God. I don't think God's desire for his church is suffering. I think God's desire for his church is blessing. But what he understands, what we often miss, is that the church he's trying to produce requires going through these seasons.
I mean, when I hear that, I hear, and there's sacrifice in humility, right? Yeah. There's dying to your flesh in humility. There's consistently reminding yourself the first shall be last, the last shall be first in humility. These are all things that's going to create extreme tension. In our church and my life and everyone's life, right? That like has to approach this. I think we have grown so far away from biblical humility that it's gonna take like therapy. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? like legit, and like it's gonna hurt. Like to say I'm gonna serve your ministry. This is something that like they taught us in Bible and in ministry school. I'm gonna serve your ministry like it's my own. So like, I'm going to give my blood, sweat, and tears. Mitch has given blood, sweat, and tears to serve the vision and mission. Like, I came on board to serve the mission and vision that God's given you. And I'm going to do it like it's my own. Like, when we all have visions and dreams on how to lead our pastor a church or be a national event, whatever that looks like, right? Even if it's in the workplace or if it's, you all have something that you aspired or wanted to do. So to be a Christian, to walk through humility, to walk through living low, to walk through, I'm going to serve this man or this woman unto God, right? Like that's another concept that I don't think like, hey, when you go into work every day, when you humble yourself, when you do what you're supposed to do at extreme level of excellence, you're not working unto Chick-fil-A, blah, 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 blah. You're working unto God. So you're doing this work as if I'm serving the Lord Jesus Christ at Rooms to Go. You know what I mean? But these are, for me, these are all things that like, it's like, I think back and thinking through ministry and generation ministry, we have to start with counterculture. We have to start with pixels to kind of like, okay, look. So as elders, we realize, hey, like we goofed up, we hiccuped here and there, but now like there's this responsibility to let's dig down to the lower generations and say, hold on, like we realize some mistakes in our discipleship. We realize some mistakes in our walk. Let's make sure that the generations following us, we correct our mistakes by speaking that into the generations that's going to lead us in the future.
And I love that. And even when you think about this, right? Like, because again, this just exposes how much we've disconnected ourselves from this. Is that Jesus, in his highest form of leadership, in the last night among his disciples, washes their feet.
Right.
And it's like when you realize that the invitation, so Jesus is saying, I'm inviting you into my life. And the high point of my leadership was when I washed the feet of my people.
Yeah.
In this way of humility, that it's like, that's not our vision of success. I can tell you this, and even in that, and we are not thinking
Nobody's
about that in our lives.
TikToking that.
No, we're not teaching. By the way, by the way, like, one day, you're gonna arrive at washing people's feet.
Yeah.
And the fact that sounds crazy to us shows us how much we believe America more than the gospel.
And so to go into like what
That's not fair, Phil.
What
gross.
What stood out to me, I played football and I played football in high school, and I always had to go from practice to youth group, and I was always terrified of the one time that some guy was like, "Hey, everybody, take your shoes off," and the girl that I liked was gonna have to wash my feet, and I'd be like, "No!" And that was like a legit
one of these
fear.
days, I want to see a picture of high school Mitch with the neck.
I'll show you.
Yes, it's just unbelievable.
What stood out to me on your sermon, and what's kind of haunted me over the last couple days, is just the image of what's happening in Luke, right? Jesus is the guest of honor at a dinner party on the Sabbath. And he's he's sharing a lesson as there's the commotion of where everyone's going to sit, right? So they're listening, but they're also kind of arguing and trying to figure out where they're going to sit. And it's in the middle of this that he heals a man that was an outsider and outcast, looked down upon, was not a part of the party. But he lifts him up. I love the word seize, right? Like he grabbed him and lifted him up and healed him. It's a monumental moment. And then the Pharisees who are at this party don't even see that what he just did and what he was just revealing to them was the exact conclusion of his parable that he then shares to them to really bring them into a place of repentance. And what I see in the story, and what you begin to kind of unpack on Sunday, was that these Pharisees were sitting around a table trying to validate their level of entitlement of where they should sit, so that either the host or the guest of honor would look at where they have proven themselves worthy of honor and elevate them even higher, right? So they're arguing about where they are entitled to sit, proving and validating, well, I've done this, well, I've done this, well, I did this, well, that's, whatever it may be, to prove that they are more holy or more honorable. So that even in their proof, the guest of honor or the host would then lift them up high. And Jesus sees the arrogance, and he sees the energy expended to prove one's own entitled nature. And he goes, "You missed it. There's no one at this table that's going to be lifted up. The only one that gets seized, lifted up, healed, restored, redeemed, empowered was the one that wasn't arguing at the table, but was the one that wasn't even at the table."
To the party.
And I think for myself as a young leader, as someone that works with young leaders in the church, how often do we find our daily routine, one, not in prayer, not seeking the Lord, not even in the Word, but arguing or conversing on what gives us a place of entitlement to engage in a conversation? How often do we find ourselves around the table trying to be the one that's organized in a higher position, or proving to ourselves that the Lord's really done something in our lives, and not just coming before him humbled, waiting? And if the man was at the party, he was wanting to hear what was going to happen. They all came there wanting to hear. Yeah. The Pharisees came there wanting to be lifted up, but that man just came there hoping that he could hear. Yeah. And I just think what's haunted me is, man, what does humility look like? It comes before the Lord, not expecting to be lifted up, but just wanting to hear. I want to have that place where I have an awe and wonder of who Jesus is, where I don't anticipate, I don't just lust after what he can do for me. I just want to hear his voice. I just want to be in his presence. I just want to hear what his way is, and not what his way can do for me. I just think there's a part of you're no longer going to be able to blend the Western world's version of fame or celebrity or money or whatever it is, with what Jesus has for you. And when you take that out, there really is no reason to start talking about how cool you are.
No.
You know what I mean? When there's money and there's fame and there's tours and there's all these things, like you can spend some time talking about why you're entitled to go on said tour or make said amount of money. But when all that's thrown away, well, you're kind of at a party sitting on the outskirts going like, I have picked the hard life. And all I want is the presence of God. And I don't have any more time to argue about what makes me.
I actually think about these two stories in my life. And I'll try to tell them quite quickly, that are juxtaposed to each other, even in the midst of even my own life, in some ways, living out this parable. When I was a youth pastor in Seattle, there was another youth pastor. We certainly know who it is, and people will. Judah Smith, who was a very prominent youth pastor in Seattle and ran a really successful ministry in all dimensions of what that word means, and really impacted me. Judah's impacted me, and I remember that I had gotten connected to some people who knew him, and they were like, "Hey, you should come," and invited me to come to a Generation Church and come and be a part of it. It was just a night. I was there. And I just, I was invited, but I kind of came and I sat through the service, and I was among a group of friends, and I was actually just even sitting in a group of people I didn't really know. I had one person there with me, but we were just there. And at the very end of the service, I was kind of towards the back of the auditorium where they're at, and somebody came up and goes, "Oh, you're Phil." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I introduced him. I go, "Pastor Judah would really like to spend time with you. Will you come back with me?" And just kind of this thing, and you watched everybody's eyes.
I am so jealous.
Yeah, I know.
Of you,
You watched everybody's eyes turn, and again, this person of prominence, and even this picture, right? Like again, I'm not making any statement of myself, but there was this thing of like this invited, and it was so, I was so honored, and everybody around me was like, I didn't know who that guy was. You're you're somebody now, right? And I'm not. But the point was this incredible picture of honor that took place in that moment. It was very sweet. Judah and I aren't close by any means. Just everybody knows that. But it was a sweet moment. Then flash forward. When we were planting the church the first year we were here, and when we first moved here, it was a really difficult season. We were moved into nothing. No name, no reputation, everything that I thought I had victory over suddenly reemerges, and you feel insecure and all these things. And I didn't really know right in the beginning. You're just figuring out, I have plans and strategies, but as a church planner, you're still figuring out how that all weighs. And the Passion Conference was right here, maybe even like 4 weeks after we moved here. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, man, what a good way for me to get to know Atlanta and to make use of my time and maybe build some relationships and steal somebody from Passion. You know what I mean? And that was really not in my mind. It was really about like, I just don't even, like, I got to get embedded into this world. So I signed up to serve at the Passion Conference, right? And my ego. And I remember a moment, because Judah spoke at that conference. And I remember I'd served all day, and I was up in the highest point of the rafters of, the whatever stadium in Atlanta that was in. I was undone by envy and jealousy. And like literally on my inside was like an anger and a rage. And this is exactly what the voice inside of me was saying as Judah was speaking. That's who I am. That's who I know. That's where I belong. I don't belong here. All these people think, some random Christian serving at Passion Conference because look, and I'm like, and it was just this, honestly, it was shocking to me. It was shocking to me, the voice that was in me. It scared me. And I remember that night leaving, I felt what I felt. I said on the inside what I said, but it was disturbing. And I just thought, what has happened to me? And just even those two pictures of like, how do you become the guy who can't believe you were invited to something and had no expectations, to then you're at the largest, most significant college ministry in the world. And you think you belong somewhere? Yeah. And just the grief in my own heart. Of like, God, what has happened to me? Yeah. That this humility, where did it go? And it was an undoing that God was doing in my life. And I even think about that picture of like, this is the hard part, is Jesus, even as he moves our lives forward, is inviting us to stay tethered to this thing. Because here's what I've learned. And I now know this, and I'll have to probably relearn this lesson in any way. Whatever significance I have in my life, or whatever platform ever God chooses to give me, or however well I steward it, and even whatever gifts I bring to the table, I didn't earn any of them. Yeah. And that sense of, no, my best is a cripple at Jesus' table where Jesus' sufficiency is flowing through me. And anytime I get that mixed up, that I've earned anything, that I'm better than anyone, I've bought into a false gospel.
I like the way he ended the passage with the instruction of saying, when you have a feast, when you have a banquet, don't invite other people of the same stature of you. Invite those that can't give you anything. You know what I mean? So in humility, right, I'm thinking about, as a leader, okay, who do I disciple? Who do I pour into? Like, yes, we want to disciple and pour into as many people as we have the capacity for, but it's saying, like, I'm not going to pour into someone because I think they can be the next this.
Yeah.
And I want credit for being, dude, I was a spiritual dad. Or I led I'm in the book, right? Like, no, let's pour into, the meek, the quiet spoken homeschool kid, you know what I mean? Yeah. That is rich in spirit. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what God's going to do, but that's humility, right? Because I guess like the lure of being someone's spiritual dad, or the attraction of being someone's guy, you want to pick out who like looks the best, dressed the best, like who seems most charismatic, blah, 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 blah. And you want to pour into them because you want to be noted for like, dude, you helped save my life. Like, and if there's even a call in that passage to say, even when you're going about your walk, who you pour into, who you disciple, who you show love to, make sure that you're not picking and choosing. Like, you're just humbly and just earnestly serving the Lord in purity, and whoever, like, choose people that you can't receive anything from. Good. Love on people, give to people that like could never repay you, and Christ is your reward. So
And let me say this, I feel like this, and then Phil, you can probably close, but I feel like this actually ties everything together in the sense of what leads you to a sense of entitlement is when you look more at your past for your validation than the person that's leading you, right? So how do we actually reclaim and reimagine what life looks going forward? Well, what you can't do is come into this next season banking on all of the things that you've done, hoping that it leads you to a place of entitlement so that you enter into this new season with arrogance. If you enter into this new season with arrogance, you're going to be, I mean, look at what's happening to people that are walking in to the season of this unknown, of the storm in the West, with a sense of arrogance. They're being humiliated, right? Like, God's plan A is humility, God's plan B is humiliation. If you walk into a hard season with arrogance, you get humiliated. And I think that there's actually a lesson in like what you brought up and then what we were talking about is this idea of like, what does it mean to walk forward? You have to have your eyes fixed forward. You have to be humble. That's what makes you humble. You're looking at someone greater than you for the instructions of what you should do and not back at what you've done, thinking that you can boast or that you're prepared to go into what's next, right? And I think it's the assumption that you know what's going to happen next that leads to arrogance, and that's what goes before the fall. That's what goes before being humble. So if we can enter into the season going, hey, if I'm honest, it's a week-to-week thing, I Sabbath on Saturday and I figure out what I'm gonna do for the rest of the week, and then I do that, and then I have to figure it out again next week because life is a little more unknown than I get to than I really care for it to be. But the reality is I don't get to walk into my week, I don't get to walk into my day, I don't get to walk into moments with a sense of entitlement or arrogance, because you're gonna have a rude awakening, And I think it's beautiful how it all kind of like ties together and how that's a lesson that repeatedly happens to us, and the Lord graciously reveals that to us of, hey, you're walking into this moment with a little bit of arrogance.
Oh man, it's so good. And so I'll this thought actually works perfect because I had an end to my sermon I never got to, and that's normal. That there's in every teaching I come to on a Sunday, because I teach very prepared, but I teach from the heart, right? I mean, that's true. I can't remember the time I didn't teach from a place of like I'm ready to do this, but it's also an expression of my heart that I respond to as the Spirit leads me. And there's always things in my notes that never get said because I realize they're not as important as other things that I want to emphasize. But the end I had written to my messages in that passage of 2 Chronicles 7, that you would humble yourself, that God will come and heal your land. That word humble is Cana. It's really interesting because it's actually a Canaanite word. And the Hebrews adopted this word from Canaanite language and culture, and it's like a merchant word, and it literally, at its origin of meaning, the Canaanites were known as merchants. It was this idea of giving everything you have to this cause that you would reap from it, right? And so actually, what I love about that word, because there's a lot of words for humility in Hebrew language. There's different words you can use for humble, but this word is very specifically chosen. And when God says humble yourself, what he's actually saying is take everything about you and go all in on me. You want to humble yourself, take everything about you and go all in on me. And if you do that, I'm going to meet you there.
Yeah.
And we miss that so much of humility is that picture. And Mitch, something you talked about a long time ago, which we've heard before, but I remember you saying this because we both heard it, but how you were processing, right? The ancient rabbis used to carry these two rocks in their pockets. And then there were two things to remind themselves that simultaneously they were both sons of dust. Yeah. They were literally dust, meaningless, worthless dust that God had moved into creation. And they were sons of God, priests and princes. And it was the duality of this relationship that only finds its fullness in God himself. And I actually think that is humility. Yeah. Humility is actually when we go, I'm all in on Jesus. And I just believe everything he says about me. And you know what he says about me? I'm dust. I'm just I'm a lot of dust. And unfortunately, that dust shows up a lot. And I'm also a beloved son, adopted, and I will co-rule with Christ. And these two things, and when I have full confidence in there, let him speak to all of my value, then actually humility comes quite easy. Yeah. Because because here's the best part. Jesus has enough humility for all of us. Mm-hmm. The humility is not I source from myself, and I get to source it from him. Yeah. I get to take his humility and I get to work it through my life. And so I even think in that what a picture of going, this isn't about less of yourself. It's about who you really are. And when you really know who you really are in Jesus, humility is going to flow from that. So here's my encouragement. Go all in, right? Like sell everything. You even see the parable of Jesus going, you know what the kingdom of God is like? The kingdom of God is like somebody who found a treasure in a field, and he goes back and he finds everything he owns, and he goes and buys the field in foolishness because the treasure is worth it. That's what God's after. So guys, I love you. Listen, let's grow in this, and let's seek God for this, and let's repent where humility has just become lost in our life, in our way. So love you guys. God bless you.